This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, the Jewish people, the creators of time. Tonight, an ethical defense of Zionism. With us this evening, Dr. Jason Hill, a professor of philosophy at DePaul University in Chicago and a Shillman journalism fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and so much more. Dr. Hill, what an honor and a privilege to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Hill, this evening I want to talk to you about your ethical defense of Zionism, of the Jewish people, of the Jewish civilization. But I want to start a little bit about you and also about your fascinating recent book, We Have Overcome. So, Dr. Hill, let's begin with that. Tell us a little bit about your book, We Have Overcome.
Well, We Have Overcome, an immigrant's letter to the American people, was written actually in response to a book that Ta-Nehisi Coates, the far left radical hater of America, called Between the World and Me. And I read that book twice and I got very, very angry because I started thinking a couple of things. One is that we live in an age of Americophobia where the far left has been attacking the most exceptional country to me on the face of the earth, this great republic of ours, as being intrinsically bigoted, racist, as inimical to the American dream. And Ta-Nehisi Coates in his book really painted a very dismal picture of America that established that the founding of America itself was irrevocably against the interests of Black people. And I deduced myself as an immigrant who came here at 20 years old with $120 in my pocket, worked 4 jobs to put myself through school, got a scholarship to do my PhD, and achieved the American dream. And I thought something has got to be done. And then I started witnessing the growing hatred of America, the anti-America mentality among the professoriate in the universities. Jamie, I cannot emphasize to you how much professors in the humanities and the social sciences hate this country. So I decided to write an antidote. I decided to write a love letter to the American people, telling them exactly why this is the greatest republic that has ever existed on the face of the earth, what makes America an exceptional country, and what makes its people an exceptional people, and why I think that what I established as the moral meaning of America. I decided to tell the story of immigrants who came here legally with very little in their pockets, who didn't ask for anything like myself except to be left alone and not have any obstructions placed in their paths, and who made it the proper way, which was an antidote to my philosophical antipode, Ta-Nehisi Coates. So the book is really a love letter to the American people, saying exactly what makes America the greatest republic on the face of the earth, what makes capitalism the best economic system for Blacks and other minorities and all people in America to achieve parity, to achieve success. I defend the free market and enterprise. I defend individualism, and I defend limited government, that a small government is the best that a proper republic such as ours should aspire to.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hill. So inspiring, but I'm a little bit confused because when I watch CNN and MSNBC, when I listen to Kamala Harris and to Cory Booker and many others, including on The View, didn't you experience all this oppressive white supremacism? How did you achieve this success and also fall in love with America with all this oppression in this country?
So I would say that this notion of white supremacy being the far right or the alt-right having a coercive monopoly on oppression and white supremacy is a lie, is a myth, because the most virulent form of racism that I have experienced in this country has come from the progressive far left. I call them the regressive left, because they actually need victims. They actually need to expropriate your agency, and they need you to suffer indefinitely in order for them to have significance in their lives. And when I had no victim story to tell them, when I said I came here with $120 in my pocket and I want no special favors, I expect nothing from America except to be left alone and a chance to pursue my dreams, this was quite anathema to the role that they had assigned themselves to. This was an insult to them. So I've never fought racism actively. I've always adduced myself as evidence of its utter stupidity and as a form of psychosis, and moved forward with my life using my own excellence in my character, my intellect, and always trying to exercise the best virtues, moral virtues in my character, to forge ahead in this great republic of words, which after all doesn't promise you an outcome. It promises you an opportunity, and it's for us to seize that opportunity and use the best within ourselves to try to achieve the goals that we have set for our lives.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill. I want to get to how you've been treated by the left at your university. Want to talk about Israel, but just a little bit more time on you. What a fascinating story. Dr. Hill, you have a grandfather that's Jewish. Am I correct? Can you give us a little bit about your background?
Well, my maternal grandfather was Sephardic Jew. Was a Sephardic Jew, and he married. It was very difficult for Jews to practice their religion under the British colonial system. He intermarried. He married a Jamaican woman, but he converted his children to Judaism, and my grandmother subsequently converted to Catholicism. But my grandfather was a Sephardic Jew.
Okay, so where was it difficult to practice Judaism?
Well, he came in the 18th century, in the late 19th century, to Jamaica, and to Jamaica. Yeah, I think he came to Jamaica through Portugal or Spain.
And the British ruled there and made it difficult to practice Judaism?
Well, they made it difficult for lots of people. I mean, no disrespect to the British colonial system, but they weren't only hard on colonial people, on colonial subjects. I don't think there were any mosques. Jews had a very hard time making it in government, even in acquiring land. The British made it also quite difficult for them. But my grandfather's father, who was Jewish, had acquired a great deal of land, and raised his children as Jews. But my grandfather married my grandmother, my mother's mother, who was part East Indian, part black, and took advantage of the conversion clause. But that really has very little to do with my Zionism and my love of Israel and my admiration of Jewish civilization.
No, I understand. So you were raised Catholic.
That's right.
And do you consider yourself in some ways a Jewish Christian?
Well, I went through a conversion process for a year to convert to Judaism about 3 years ago, because I was drawn more and more to Israeli politics. And I found I had been an atheist for so many years, and my atheism undid itself in spite of my best efforts. I'm now quite a religious person, a man of faith and deeply religious. And so I went through a conversion process for a year to convert to Judaism. At the last minute, I decided not to do it because I thought, my roots really are in Catholicism, and I can take the best of both worlds. There's so much of the Torah and the Talmud and the other sacred Jewish texts that I admire, and I didn't really have to choose. I'm a deist. I believe in God. I have a lot of faith, and so I get equal nourishment from Judaism as I get from my Christian faith.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a fascinating journey, and I promise we're going to move on here. I don't mean to. But you're of the Christian faith now.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hill. Fascinating. Now, let's shift now. And so with this background, with this also spiritual journey, you consider yourself a Zionist, and you see Jewish people I've done some research on you. You consider the Jewish people the post-human people and the creators of time. I know it takes 2 hours to maybe even begin to discuss this, but could you shed some light on that?
Well, I think going I think in terms of the Abrahamic religions, of course, Judaism is the first. And when Abraham left his people, the Canaanite people, and formed this relationship to God, when I say that the Jews are the creators of time, I mean in the sense that Jews were the first people to establish a metaphysical relationship with a conception of a monotheistic God. And so in terms of historic time, when we talk about the development of certain moral systems and institutions, like we are the legatees of so much of Abram and Judaism, like moral conscience, that in establishing this relationship with God, they began what I call in my second book, the creators of the historical process, where we begin this process of evolving spiritually and morally, where we develop an aspirational identity that is predicated on the laws of God, on the commandments of God, and that real time can be measured, historic time, in terms of the Jewish people entering into a historical process, by which I mean, again, entering into a process in which one meditates on one's moral evolution in terms of one's relationship to a monotheistic deity whose commandments and whose laws guide your conscience, guide your moral development. I think before this, when we had paganism and we had a system of a multiplicity of gods being worshipped by different people, this was just not the case.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. So let me ask this. In terms of anti-Semitism, and I've read your work, I've watched some of your videos, and you discuss how anti-Semitism, of course, many layers there, but it also stems from envy. But before we get to that, this discussion, whenever we're discussing the Jewish people, Jewish civilization, as you're saying, pointing out, there's a story of the ethical, morality. There are some interpretations that say that the Jewish people are hated by some, in terms of the bad people, because they gave the world conscience. What would your insight be on that?
Well, I think there are a couple of things here. One is, I think because, in my sense, the Jewish people, through, again, the creators of, or the discoverers of a monotheistic religion and developing a one-to-one relationship with one God, are the creators of the moral system of which Christians and Muslims, although you wouldn't believe it by the way Muslims behave today, are the legatees of that tradition. And I think that a great deal of invidious comparisons occur among the Abrahamic religions. You have Christians and Muslims competing against the Jews. But the Jews really, I think, were the creators of this incredible moral institution of which the other religions are derived from or derivatives of. And when I say that they are a post-human people, I mean they give us, among other things, a model for what it means to have an aspirational relationship between oneself and God. I don't think before Judaism that, at least in my study of civilizations and religions, that had happened. I think we had a system where we had the sky gods and we had earth cults and sky cults where we appeased the gods and we placated them. But in terms of the idea of meditating on using oneself as a site of meditation and using God as a phenomenon through which we could aspire and evolve to become better human beings, more evolved human beings. That's why I call them a post-human people, because they have, since the time of Abram, they've given us a method of contemplating what it would look like to evolve out of our animal natures, our natural natures, into something that is really made in the image of God.
Fascinating, and thank you, Dr. Hill. And interwoven with that And connected, linked to that, of course, is just undoubtedly, undeniably, such a superior culture and civilization. When you look at, for instance, the Islamic Middle East, and in terms of what's innovated there and what's created there, and you look at Israel, I think it just speaks for itself. So in terms of the innovation and all of everything the Jewish civilization creates, as you said, can you talk a little bit about how anti-Semitism stems from envy?
Well, I think, the philosopher Ayn Rand coined a term called hatred of the good for the good. She never really, I don't know that she elaborated too much on it. But I think the Jews are the perfect examples of this, where Jewish identity is also a moral identity. And Jewish people have held themselves up as models of excellence to be emulated, starting out with their imperative of repairing the world. This is something that, again, Christianity has inherited this from Judaism, to go into the world and to make it a better place, to repair the world, to fight for justice, not just for Jewish people, but for all peoples. And I think that the Jews have been hated because a constitutive feature of their moral identity is to be good soldiers in the world to repair the world. And this has incurred a great deal of envy and resentment among those individuals who either cannot measure up to that constitutive feature of Jewish identity, to repair the world, to be a model of excellence. And secondly, I think this is why I think Jewish civilization is so advanced. When you look at a diasporic people who for 3 millennia, until the refounding of Israel in 1948, have withstood all sorts of pogroms and persecutions, and they're the most persecuted people on the face of the earth, and have excelled in every culture, in every nation in which they have been ensconced, that Western civilization is inextricably linked to Jewish civilization. And I think this is, again, because the Jewish people have been so successful and have made such enormous contributions to Western civilization. This has also incurred the envy and the wrath of people who hate the good for being the good.
Right. And Dr. Hill, I don't think that there's any record of any affirmative action programs for the Jewish people when...
I said this in my book, We Have Overcome. I said wherever the Jewish people went, they were never granted, I use the word, an affirmative action visa to perform, through their resilience, through grit, tenacity, and honor, and hard work, and through a cultural tradition of study, they have made excellent strides wherever they've gone.
Dr. Hill, do you think we're being a little bit unfair? Because when you look at, for instance, Palestinian culture in Gaza, the West Bank, and under Hamas, I mean, they produce a lot of suicide bombers, for instance. That's kind of an achievement of some kind?
They have no culture. I would call it a culture of death, a cult of death that is predicated completely on nihilism. I mean, Article 7, I think, of Hamas's constitution calls for a global caliphate, which is not to establish anything that is progressive in the real sense of progressive, not the way that the left use progressive, but progressive in terms of enhancing human flourishing, human thriving. All they want to do is establish Sharia law across the world to kill people. These jihadists have never created an ethical or a political culture that is worthy of emulation. What they've done is impose upon the world a cult of death.
Dr. Hill, you can just imagine even them looking at Israel from their side and just seeing the skyscrapers, the freedom, the happiness, the individualism. It must be extremely humiliating and embarrassing.
It's embarrassing because of their own ideological malfeasance and because of their own refusal to enter into the historical process, the process of evolution, of spiritual enlightenment. There has been no Islamic Reformation that I can think of in the modern world. And so, of course, it angers them because while they, because of their own ideological and political malfeasance and their commitment to these cults of death, continue to atrophy, they watch Jewish civilization, which is Israel is our alter ego in the Middle East. And what Israel did in that desert swamp, which was swampland, and transformed it into a glorious, magnificent technological civilization, must really, really irk them.
Yeah, an incredible, incredible narrative. Dr. Hill, you've talked about American civilization, Western civilization, Jewish civilization linked. Can you talk about that briefly?
Well, I mean, as a philosopher, yes, I love to talk about this because when I think of Western civilization, I think of the birth of Western civilization, of course, going back to ancient Greece, and then being taken up by the Greco-Romans and ancient Rome, which created the concept of law, as limited as that concept of law was, applicable only to male Roman citizens. And then we go through the Renaissance, and we go through the Enlightenment period, and the period of industrialization, and the French Revolution. But we see the birth of America, a country that I think is the absolute historical culmination of Western civilization, where the concept of individual rights was given its most highest form, where the idea of citizenship and belonging not being predicated on blood, ethnicity, nationality, but theoretically open to all persons. That is an unprecedented phenomenon in the history of the world. And then when we just look in the history books and we see that the enormous contributions that Jews have made to Western civilization in the form of science, art, music, literature, technology, I think all three come together gloriously and have culminated in the birth of America, the United States of America, in 1776, the Declaration of Independence. And I think the reestablishment or the refounding of Israel in 1948 saw a second incarnation of a great civilization gracing the face of the planet. So I link all three, I call them phenomena, but because I don't know of a better word to describe Western civilization, Jewish civilization, and American civilization, all contributing to this glorious achievement of a type of humanity that heretofore had been unimaginable. So I see all three of them being inextricably linked together. I think what's good for Jewish civilization is good for the world. Jewish civilization is an international treasure trove that has got to be protected given the enormous contributions that it has made in the world. The state of Israel is an ethical state because it was forged. It's the only nation in the Bible that God has blessed, first of all. And secondly, but for the atheists, that means nothing. But secondly, also, it is the only country in that dark, primitive, savage, barbaric part of the world that practices religious reciprocity, that is an asylum for anyone seeking sexual persecution, anyone seeking gender discrimination on the basis of gender. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that is a domain. It has widened the domain of the ethical for people excluded from the pantheon of the human community in those Arab countries.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. You know, I think you got to stop beating around the bush and saying what you really think about these things. Okay, that's my attempt at humor. Dr. Hill, thank you so much. Now, look, the academic campus in the United States, just so much diversity, so much inclusiveness. So when you wrote an article for The Federalist defending Israel's right to annex the West Bank, you ran into that inclusiveness and diversity, didn't you?
I did, Jamie, I prefer to use the word Judea and Samaria. I know that the West Bank is a common coinage in today's world, but I prefer to use Judea and Samaria. But I did write that article, and the response was horrific. It was I don't want to use this as a kind of platform as a sob story because I'm no victim, but the Students for Justice in Palestine and the college Democrats and the Young Socialists and Students Against Incarceration banded together along with the acting provost and the faculty council and issued a censure against me. The president decided not to censure me. But in that censure and in that resolution, I was called a racist, someone who was advocating genocide and a war criminal, and painted in the most heinous of terms because I defended Prime Minister Netanyahu's right to annex land which properly belongs to Israel. And I painted out in that article why I thought that in 1967 Israel fought a defensive war among a set of thuggish nations, including Jordan, and it should really have annexed the land as soon as it had seized it,
But Dr. Hill, the leftists also distributed all these leaflets with your picture actually on it, and they were, libeling you and slandering you in many vicious ways. You didn't even feel safe. If I'm correct, you had to have a bodyguard for a while.
I had to have police escort for about a month.
This is on an academic campus.
This is on an academic campus, and I was accused. The defamatory claims against my character, the libelous and slanderous claims, they've created something like a database so that any student, I think, who registers for my classes will see the resolutions passed against me with a warning that I'm a racist, that I'm a xenophobe, that I'm a sexist. And so they have also led a boycott. I've had 2 of my classes boycotted because these Students for Justice in Palestine, which is really a surrogate for Hamas on campus. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah, Dr. Hill, you would think that Jewish students, now of course we know there are some brave ones and conservative ones, we got that. But in terms of leftist Jews, you would think that the Jewish students on campus, who you are actually standing up for, because as we know, the Hamas Charter doesn't just want the extermination of Israelis, they want extermination of Jews all over the world. You would think that the Jewish students would have stood up for you. What happened in terms of even most leftist Jewish students?
Well, they turned against me and they sided with the Students for Justice in Palestine because and I cannot emphasize this more, one thing I have learned since April, since the publication of that article, is how many leftist Jewish organizations, not just students, are passionately, and I use the word passionately and vehemently, committed to the obliteration of Israel.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's such a twisted psychology. So there's some kind of a self-hatred and a yearning to shed themselves of who they are or of their own Judaism here?
It's more than that. It's the fact that they have been seduced by the people who call themselves Palestinians. Let's be clear about that. Most of them are Jordanian Arabs. The people who call themselves Palestinians have seduced these students into thinking that they are victims, that they are the victims of a genocidal apartheid state called Israel. And I do not for 1 minute think that these Jewish organizations on the left or these students are blinded. I think they have bought into a cult of nihilism, of relativism, a cult of death. And I think that their own desire to belong to the group that at this moment on campus wields so much power, which is the Palestinian Students for Justice and the Palestinian students, that this has superseded logic on their part.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Just incredible. The brown shirts and these Maoist Red Guards, what's happening on our campus now. Now let me get this, on our campuses now. Let me get this straight, because I read about what was happening to you there. Am I correct that a black university professor, that they had demanded that this black university professor take a racial sensitivity training workshop?
Yes, they did. And I steadfastly refused. I won't do it, and I'll never do it.
So what do you think would even be happening in that workshop? What would they be teaching you?
Well, it would be, let's make no mistake about it. I want your viewers to understand this. The workshop would be headed by the Palestinian Students for Justice, or by Palestinians, who would give me a good dose of what they think I'm lacking in, which is a history of Israel, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that the land really belongs to Palestinians. Right. It would be nothing but brainwashing, really.
So Dr. Hill, you faced so much libel, slander, defamation of your character. Your life was in jeopardy. You had to have a security guard. And the university's acting provost did what? She
censored me. In no uncertain terms, she issued a letter of condemnation saying that I had abused my academic freedom, that I was a purveyor of something on the order of hatred, that I had maligned students, but more importantly, that she was proud of the way the students and the faculty had reacted to me, which means she was proud of them taking over buildings, distributing thousands of leaflets, calling for them to dump me, which in some cases could mean dump my body, and to have me fired. And that's what she approved of.
Dr. Hill, where do things stand now? You're okay? You're still at DePaul?
I'm still at DePaul. I have legal counsel, and I'm exploring my options. But I have to be, because of I'm tenured, but you do sign a yearly contract, so I'll be there at least for another year teaching my classes.
Dr. Hill, when Donald Trump says something about an individual and doesn't mention their race, but the person happens to be a person of color, he's a racist. If conservatives say something about a person like Ilhan Omar that happens to be a person of color, all of a sudden any criticism, that's racist. But the leftists who criticized you, I think it could be fairly said that you're a person of color. How come they're not racist? How does this formula work?
Well, it works in an interesting way, because it works because of a script that a lot of people of color have bought into. That is, if they're black and they are on the left, which I'm not, but if they're black and they're on the left, they play according to a certain script handed down to them by these leftist organs and these bureaucrats running the institution. And so when they deviate from that script, they get accused, in my case, of being an ideological retrograde. And so I was told that that this has nothing to do with my race. This has everything to do with my ideological position. I think something more nefarious is happening. It's how dare he, a black man, an immigrant from another country, stray from the script, from an oppressed people like the Palestinians, and side with the so-called oppressors called the Jews.
Right. Dr. Hill, you're a brave and noble stand-up gentleman, and thank you for everything that you do and are doing. What a frightening narrative it is, what a frightening reality happening now, especially on our campuses. I think that reveals a lot of what's happening in the larger culture. You are you're at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. You're a Shillman Fellow. And I suggest to all of our viewers to read Dr. Jason Hill's profound and powerful articles at Front Page Magazine. And his writing there has become possible because of the Shillman Fellowship. Dr. Hill, before we go, the viewers who are excited on the edge of their seat and want to learn more about you and want to support you, where should they go? What sites should they visit? What books should they buy?
I'd like them to buy We Have Overcome, An Immigrant's Letter to the American People, because I do paint, aside from praising this remarkable Republic of ours, There are many, many sections devoted to my very radical pro-Israel, pro-Jewish civilization stance. They can go to jasondamianhill.com to visit my site, and they can also visit me on Twitter at Jason D Hill 6, and also on Facebook at Dr. Jason D Hill 1913 to learn more about my views.
Thank you so much. What an honor and a privilege it was to have you, Dr. Hill, on the Glazov Gang.
Thank you for having me, Jamie.
We wish you well and continue your brave and noble fight for the truth and for freedom.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching the Glazov Gang this evening. Look up Jason Hill and support this powerful and brave voice. And we'll see you soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night.